Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means it's time for a new How to Bass tutorial. And oh my god, I'm actually doing it on time, and today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. Yeah. So, I have utilized the techniques made to make this sound before, but this one is particularly interesting because I'm doing some things that make it a little bit more usable. So, basically, to start, what's happening here is I'm using the phaser. I have a custom shape engaged, which is doing this to it, and I really just kind of shape out just to see what that was like. I have the speed off, and the primary modulation is coming from moving around the offset knob itself. And if you want to automate it, you would automate this. And then I have Unison engaged. I have the Unison shape set here, and I also have the Prism shape set, and it's mono, even though I have two voices, and not mono in the sense that they're both center, as in I only hear one voice, and what that's happening because at the volume I have the Unison index mapping set like this, which means that one of the two voices is just off, and that's sort of where the usable part of this comes into play. So it's being distorted and it's being compressed. But let's talk about like how this actually works out from scratch. So you got yourself a sound. Also, this is square mode here. This is saw mode. Got yourself a sound. Make yourself a phaser. And set the harmonic mode. And maybe a different width setting. It seems to behave almost like the regular phaser would. But the harmonic mode is special. Octave mode and Hertz mode speak to like octave and Hertz does everywhere else around Harmor. It speaks to the distribution of its motion, even to either octaves of harmonics or individual Hertz values themselves. The EQ, for example, in just regular FL, distributes the position of frequencies based on octaves. You can see here that C1, C2, 3, all the way up is completely evenly distributed the whole way through, but like the numbers are not. The same space that occupies 50 to 100 hertz occupies 5,000 to 10,000. So this is 50 hertz and this is 5,000 hertz. So this particular graph is distributed to us evenly based on octaves. If it were distributed based on hertz values, where each individual hertz has the same length, then the numbers would be the even one and the octaves would actually start to expand as time progressed. Actually, I guess they would contract. But point being is that that's what octave and hertz mean. Harmonic mode is a little bit different. Harmonic mode, when you're not doing anything, doesn't seem to do anything different, but the second you start to screw around with any kind of pitch parameter, like Prism, for example, you can see it start to just move around. And what's happening is that the actual, like the way that the phaser works in Harmor is that it's just telling certain harmonics to be on or off over time. And like if we like trace the particular harmonic, we can see, okay, now it's off, now it's back on again. And then in concert, it kind of sounds like what a phaser does to sounds. Now in harmonic mode, that value of, okay, now turn off, now turn back on again, gets changed based on that particular harmonic's pitch. So we must mess around with it with the Prism, which the Prism does, like just independently, moves around pitch, then it will create a different sort of motion there. Now you can go to the Harmonic Prism window, and you can get rid of all of this, and you can like put in your own particular pitch change shape, and then that will also apply to the Hertz phaser positions. So you see here only the center area is moving because only the center area has pitch change. And then if I move them around, you see the change moves with it. And the Unison, as it turns out, does exactly that. Unison is just changing the pitch of individual harmonics. Now, Unison in a regular sense would change pitch of everything evenly, but in Harmor, we were able to determine how much pitch change there is in Unison on a per harmonic basis. Much like the Prism is. In fact, this is basically the same exact thing as the Prism, only it applies to Unison and not the Prism. So where this matters in terms of utilizing it, as I did in the other example, was that I have a change that I made here, and I have a change that I made in the Prism, and they're both kind of adding together to create a different kind of change. And also, like, you sort of can modulate the change by automating these parameters and like the Prism and the harmonic pitch itself. But when you do that, we get the phase cancellation due to the fact that this is two voices in unison, which means that there are two voices that are doing a version of this that are a little bit different, which sometimes is great. In fact, most of the time it's awesome. Like I've done this with like this many times in Harmor because it makes some pretty dope sounds. But in particular, sometimes I really want there to just be a voice and just to leave it alone and not really have to worry about like the phase cancellation, at least not in terms of like a Unison version of it, but in terms of the version of it where like the harmonics are like inside the one voice is causing the phase cancellation. So what you can do is you can utilize the Unison index mapping modifier for whatever parameter. What Unison index mapping is pretty, like I actually realized recently this replicates what it's like to have hardware Unison. Because in hardware Unison, if you want to have Unison of a particular hardware synth, like a DPO module that I have like in my hardware module rack, is that like if you want to have Unison, you gotta have more than one, because you basically like everything is just one oscillator, one filter, whatever, or two oscillators sometimes. But like if you want to have Unison, of what you're doing, you gotta have both things. And what do you think the chances are if you actually matching up your parameters perfectly, even if you're just like you're doing it by hand and the knobs or whatever? Like you're not going to get them pre-perfect, which means that like not only are you getting pitch unison and phase unison, but you're getting parameter unison. Where like in the DPO there's like a wave shaper setting, and like that's not going to be perfect. So that means that there's going to be a little bit of difference between those two things just because of that. So the Unison index mapping feature inside Citrus and inside Harmor, because they're in both things, actually replicates that quite well, because you're able to set a parameters value per Unison voice, and that's what's happening here in the volume tab. When we have two voices active, this side becomes the volume for the left voice, and this side becomes the volume for the right voice. And if I increase the number of voices, you can see that the poles increase, and each of these poles represents one Unison voice, except for when we're in 2 mode, where the middle pole doesn't mean anything. In 3 voice mode, it becomes the third voice, but in 2 voice mode, it's just whatever. And in the mode where all the poles do represent a voice, in between the poles doesn't mean anything. Whatever the value is at the pole is what determines that voice's particular that parameter's voice's particular value. But in the middle of the voice doesn't mean anything. Like it doesn't like something happening here doesn't matter. This isn't changing anything. Having said so, whatever, all that 2 voices. If I turn the left voice down, we actually don't see anything. The visualizer only ever shows you one voice at a time, and in particular, I don't know. I guess it doesn't like stereo, but actually, I guess it shows you the first voice, which I guess it claims the right voice as being the quote unquote first voice, and if you're not showing that, or I guess it claims the left, because left mono. That makes sense, because left is mono, and most things that have stereo and mono, left is usually considered the mono signal. So it means that this left voice is voice number 1, and that's what it's showing us. And if we get rid of it, we don't see anything. But we still hear it, obviously, because we're hearing the other voices. So I get rid of the right voice. And now we're getting the effect, but we're not getting the stereo business and the different voices for Unison, and we're not getting the phase cancellation from the Unison. We're getting phase cancellation because we're changing to put the pitch of individual harmonics, which means that they're no longer in harmonic position, which means they're going to phase cancel. That's just what being in harmonic means. But now we're still just having a one set of 512 voices as opposed to like more than one. Now then I turn on square mode. So this was basically that whole idea with the custom phaser shape. And I have the prism and the Unison mode. Now, when we're doing this, when we have 2 voices Unison and I turn the volume off on one of them, so that means we really only just have one voice, what's going on in the Unison pitch window here and what's going on in the Harmonic Prism window is exactly the same thing. It is literally the exact same thing. And the reason why I'm doing the both of them is because this actually gives us interesting sort of modulation capabilities, where increasing this changes one particular kind of this, and changing this changes another kind of it. So we actually have quite a bit of expressiveness that we can control from there. Not that I'm doing that here, but I just want to point out that you can, since the 2 of these things are actually the same. And we could actually avoid this entire process wholly just by doing this on the prism with the specific prism shape, and not having to worry about the whole 2 voices Unison and Unison index mapping and that kind of thing. But I like Unison index mapping, and I think it's kind of cool to point out, and that's really why I did that there. And of course, the whole two of them combined can get you interesting results. And square mode. Yeah. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. This will be available to download as a patch in the description of this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and as usual, have a nice day. Take a long time to turn the video off.